The Board of Education recognizes the value of public comment on educational issues and the importance of providing an opportunity to the public to express themselves on school-related matters of concern to the residents of East Brunswick. To allow for a fair and orderly public comment period in accordance with Board Policy 167, individual comments are limited to 5 minutes. Members of the public are reminded that this is a public televised meeting of the Board of Education. To protect the privacy of all students and staff, concerns regarding individual students and staff members should generally be addressed by first meeting with the appropriate administrative staff by New Jersey Statute 10412B. Is there anyone that would like to address the board this evening?
It's quite a line.
Yeah. Well, seeing none, we'll close the public session. I'd like to move the agenda and combine all action items A through E.
See if there's anything that needs to be separated first.
What?
If anyone has anything.
Is there anything that needs to be separated?
Is it discussion or separation?
You want something separate? We could discuss anything, but is there something that needs?
I don't want to separate anything, but I have a couple of questions.
Okay, after the motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion?
Just a broad question. B2, I saw there was a lot of adjustments made for special education, the other districts. Could you explain when and the circumstances that so many are made?
I'm just scrolling down to that section.
It's B2, pages 4, 5.
I believe what happens is the actual, there's an estimation for what's anticipated to be the actual tuition.
Right.
And then as we get closer to the start of the school year, the actual bills are then adjusted. And these are adjustments to reflect the actual tuition.
The original estimates that were provided were not the final estimates. So we're working off of estimated tuitions. They don't get finalized until after the year is done and an audit is completed. So there were subsequent adjustments that came from the schools.
Okay. So if it's in our favor, it comes back into our budget, correct?
Well, we haven't even encumbered the money yet, so it's not an issue. This is for the coming year.
Yes.
So this is not an issue that is affecting our bottom line at this point. It's simply a matter of how much is the respective purchase order for each student going to amount to.
Thank you.
So it wasn't as though a school actually decreased their tuition fees?
Oh, no. No. It's simply an adjustment to the estimate.
And somebody, therefore, also did not increase theirs by a mere $2?
Yeah.
Got it.
Mrs. Becker?
It's the whole agenda, right, Brad, you said? Okay. First of all, A1 and A2, we are accepting gifts from 2 PTAs. Lawrenceburg, I'm scrolling as fast as I can.
Frost.
Lawrenceburg and Frost, I just wanted to thank them so much. A tremendous amount of work goes into raising money. Our PTAs and the parents in their respective schools work so hard, and what they're buying is going right back into the school and for the kids, usually technology, and just want to say good job. Okay, a couple of questions. Scrolling back. Okay. Bernie, this really isn't so much about the district, but I'm questioning why the state facilitates something a certain way. Under B10, the approval of non-public technology purchases.
Yes.
The district serves as a flow-through for the state funds.
That's correct.
The funds are specifically allocated to non-public schools and are not for East Brunswick Public Schools. Maybe this is a dumb question. Why do districts have to act as flow-throughs? Why isn't there a way, it just seems like one more thing we have to do that perhaps if we didn't, time could be better spent on things for the district?
Well, you're right. It is one more thing that school districts have to do, but it is the law.
I understand, but do you have any idea why?
I think if I was to take a guess at this, I'd say that it enables the state to only deal with the 600 or so school districts in these non-public payments rather than dealing directly with each of the many more non-public schools that would exist out there. I think it's an efficiency issue for the state.
So they just would have to work harder, and
They like us
they would
doing it.
rather us to work harder.
Exactly.
Okay. I have a question on B11, the sponsored and non-sponsored clubs and activities. First with the elementary schools. Each elementary school is only allowed 5 clubs. This is, I'm assuming, for budgetary reasons, but does anyone know, is this also a policy of the district?
I can tell you that
I
based
know Lou
on,
isn't here.
well, based on the board's direction a number of years ago when we had policy cuts, this was the board's direction that elementary schools would be limited to 5 clubs.
Where's that? What do you mean, what does board direction mean?
Well, at the time that the budget was struck,
In the-
there were a number of reductions that were made,
Right?
and that moving forward, the elementary level clubs would be limited to 5 per school.
Did we say moving forward or in that year?
Todd,
Yeah.
this was back that year that the state
remember.
took that big,
I remember that.
Well,
but-
right.
but did we-
2010.
but-
and it was meant then we have to do it. But I agree with your statement last week that we really need to look at this.
Yes.
Yeah, but I just remember, was that I would like to pull the minutes of that. Was it just the year we were dealing with?
No,
Or was it
going-
going forward?
I don't think we ever revisited it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't remember, but maybe we should.
That's
Things
why-
were really tight those
Yeah.
those years
Yeah.
after
5
that.
clubs
That's
in
why
our
I-
district is not enough.
That's why I asked, and
Safety patrol.
also, some of it was enrollment-driven. We were given facts at the time, I do remember that,
Yeah.
showing the number of kids going back over, let's
Because
say.
if we think about it, the elementaries have only 5 clubs, the secondaries are clubs and athletics. I mean, so it's a huge
But I
difference.
Well, I
do
was
think
gonna get-
that, I thought, well, my understanding was that they would be able to select different clubs each year based on student interest. Whereas, I don't know, I feel like what I'm seeing presented in the information given to us
We're all the same
is
clubs.
that these are basically the same year after
Usual
year.
suspects,
There
yeah.
was a difference, I think that there was a gardening club at some of the schools.
Right,
But
but I don't know
Frost.
whether, see, I thought that it was driven by student interest in each of the schools.
I think it's budgetary, so it's limited to 5, and I think, Todd, that we also had talked about in the strategic planning committee,
That's one of the
in the
topics.
extracurricular subcommittee, that's going to be one of the topics. I just wanted to confirm it was budget-driven.
Were the middle schools
It-
and the high schools also capped?
That was my
Yeah.
next question.
They
Everyone
were.
was capped.
At the high school, is there a maximum, there is a
Yeah.
maximum number?
There
Okay.
is.
Yeah, we have to really
Revisit.
Is it-
rethink this.
Is it the pleasure of the board for us to start investigating, like, what our capacity is, before the strategic planning committee really convenes on this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
my sense is strategic planning would be talking about the more appropriate clubs, and whether, in other words, it may be determined that if we have resources, they should be put in the middle school or the junior high school, I don't know. But maybe we have to at least get the outer bounds of the money we can spend on staffing these clubs.
But I'm also
then
seeing,
figure out where it goes.
if you look at the list of clubs in the high school, it's very representative of our changing culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that clubs have been developed to reflect not just student interest, but what's going on in the world. And I think that we should always provide that flexibility.
Do we monitor that? Like how often clubs are being,
Well, that's why I asked if there's a
Every year.
maximum, so
do?
that must mean that if a club is added,
Right.
there must be a club that is
Deleted.
deleted. And I'd like to know a little bit more about that process. Again, if it's based on enrollment in the clubs, are they looking for a club that, let's say, has traditionally gotten less than 10 kids or between 10 and 15? Is that the one that's dropped? You know, I'm sure there is some kind of a process.
There are minimum thresholds for
Right.
the clubs, and since we are a pay-to-participate district, we have those records, so we can track what the actual participation is in every club. And based on that information, that drives a lot of the decision-making in terms of what happens as to whether a club will continue or get traded off for some other club if the participation is low.
So if a new club comes up and they say they're going to have 100 kids, does that mean that the club that has the least number gets
That's what I
dropped
was
because we have
asking,
the...
is dropped.
Well,
Is that
I'm
what's
not sure
happening?
that's.
I don't
Not
know.
necessarily.
No, not necessarily.
I'm not sure that's the right decision-making. What I don't think, I haven't seen it, maybe I'm wrong here, is that when we figure out what clubs are appropriate at elementary and the middle school and et cetera, are we taking into account the fact that we want to get kids almost into a system of thinking about taking clubs? So we start in elementary and that will lend them to want to do it in the next school and the next school and the next school. That's something I think we should be thinking about in picking the appropriate clubs, is to keep them doing
The
it.
other thing is some of these clubs are clubs that not all students are allowed to participate in. So, was it Susanna that said safety, student council, you have to be selected. So now you have students that only have like chorus and, video, or I'm just looking at some of the other gardening, ones that they can choose from, but you do have students that will not be allowed to participate in all 5 of the offerings.
Also, if you look at the variety of clubs at the high school, again, it's kind of exciting to see what we're offering, and I'd like to see that trickle down to Hammersholt and Churchill. If you look at the list of those clubs, there's a lot of same old, not reflecting kind of new and exciting things. We all know that by the time the kids get to high school, they have to be involved in things for the college application process. But you brought up a good point about starting in the elementary school, because we also know that a college doesn't want to see a child sign up for 8 clubs in 11th grade, whereas previously they hadn't taken anything. They want to see some kind of a continuity. They want to see a growth in the interest, starting out as a member of a club, achieving some kind of a leadership position. So I think that working backwards, Todd, is also a good idea. And that if we could get some more, what the kids would find exciting and inspirational extracurriculars going on below the high school, that would help that process.
As we look at this, it has to be a K-12 view of clubs.
That's the point of the strategic planning.
Yeah.
I guess what we would need to know is it something that's in policy? Do we have to policy change to make this
No.
happen? Or
No.
it's not a
It's
policy?
budgetary.
It's budgetary.
Budgetary.
It's not policy.
But let me prepare a report.
Great.
So what kinds of information would you like to know?
Probably
Participation?
participation data, financial, what clubs we have now in every grade, right?
Okay.
Every school, because I think the elementaries can have their own,
Okay.
depending, probably is the usual suspects, but I think we would need what clubs we have, maybe participation over a few years.
Trends?
Also, what was cut in that drastic?
Yeah,
What
right.
was cut?
Well, you'll see that when you look at, if you go back to, say, 10, here's the clubs we had in 10, 11, 12, you'll see what was cut and what was added.
It was
I'd like
10.
to go back at almost at least a decade, if it wouldn't, just to have that.
Oh, I'm just kidding. I've only been here a year.
All right.
I bet you there's a book somewhere.
8 years.
All
I
right,
know, but
that-
2010 was already 5 years ago, so you need to go back beyond
10
that.
year-
This
10-year
is
look
such a
back.
vital component of our
Right.
students' life in this district, and
I'd like to know also possibly the ones that they would expand into, like if they could expand, what would they expand into?
Oh, so areas of interest that we currently don't
Just
have?
a survey on what the kids.
how many,
like.
yeah, and at the high school level especially, how many clubs a year are proposed that we turn down?
Right, and
Because of budgetary
I'd want to know
reasons.
if there were clubs that kids have been asking for we didn't get, clubs that staff have been asking for that they haven't gotten. That's a discussion for the committee, but
Just so you know, too, that this isn't purely financial, it's also about finding appropriate sponsors for the
Right.
clubs. So it becomes a manpower issue
Yep.
of how many people are willing to step
Well,
up
that's
in
why
that
it would be
role.
interesting to
Right.
find out.
Okay, so
But we
The
should know,
average, how
but
many
we should know
clubs
the
are turned
financial
down?
too.
Yeah,
We
but
should know what it's
what's
costing
turned
us.
down, and if we could get an idea of the reason, if it's
Okay.
personnel, if it's financially driven, and then we could take all this information and really, but I think it's good to have a conversation about it at the full board level also, see what direction the board would like to go in. Because we have X amount of money, and we want to allocate some more in this area. It's got to come from somewhere.
Okay. So a survey, we'll do a 10-year look back.
8,
What was cut? We'll go 10. what was cut, participation trends.
And approximately what it costs us.
Yeah, what it cost.
Which clubs, how many clubs are turned down?
How many clubs are turned down?
And a little-
What's the process for
Yeah,
establishing
a little bit about
new?
the process for establishing new, and also how to choose the ones that are deleted when we add a new one.
Okay. All right.
But when a new club is proposed, is it always under equal access on a trial basis for a year?
No.
I'm trying to remember, some of them stay there.
At the high
Yeah.
school, they are. They're on a
But
trial
I think they're on a
basis.
trial basis for a
Really?
year before
Yes.
they become official.
Under equal access?
Yeah, you may have.
Because there's no paid advisor for that.
Right, but it wasn't always like that. I'm sorry I said no so
Like
quickly.
the example this year was we had students at one of our board meetings who were interested in establishing a political club.
Right.
And that would replace what was formerly known as the Young Democrats, Young Republicans. And the interest has waned in a specific party affiliation, so this political club was generally designed to be a broader appeal. Then with under the umbrella of the political club, you could spin off and decide if you wanted to explore what a Republican Party does or what a Democratic Party does, or a Libertarian, or whatever party you're interested in. And they're on a one-year, like, temporary, like, you know,
Trial
a
basis.
trial basis. And they have to generate the interest among the students to see if they can sustain that interest. And if they can, then that's when they can move up to and establish themselves. But in talking to Dr. Vanilla, that probably one of those clubs or both of those clubs they formerly had would fall off because those students would just generally gravitate over toward the political club.
But aren't there certain clubs that,
A certain nature.
yeah, that are of a certain nature or topic that requires them to be considered the equal access?
Yes,
Yes.
forever.
Correct.
So equal access then includes
separate,
those
right.
as well as the new ones that are on a trial basis?
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Mack, I know again,
Nope,
putting you on
everything was covered, thank you.
Putting you on the spot, no, that's not what I was, I'm putting you on the spot. Any, from having worked at the high school for so long, being involved in extracurricular from the athletic side, but just anything you'd want to share with us?
Everything was truly touched upon, and you said it as well, Mrs. Becker, the idea that the students need and want to be involved in the clubs, and students need and must be leaders in the clubs, and they're looking for that. So as the school district diversifies and culturally we expand, there's definitely a need to revisit and take a look at clubs across the board, whether it's like 5 elementaries for me was like a little shocking as well. So, and as Dr. Valesky said, a piece of it is financial, but looking forward to that discussion.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the 5 elementaries, some of the schools are patrol and homework club, you know, and so there's really only 3 special interest clubs, and that's very limiting.
Right.
All right.
Thank you.
Is there anything else?
That was it.
Just one other comment, which might have been a reason why the number of elementary clubs was limited, is because of the fact that it would require kids to be kept after school, and that the transportation issue might become.
Right, there's no late bus, like
Right.
those at the high school.
Right.
Some of the clubs are actually in the morning, where they start like at 8 o'clock, rather than keeping the kids later after school, so.
It's a good idea.
Yep. Okay, I just want to remind everybody there's a corrected copy on the dais for the personnel.
I have another question.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. McElroy?
Is it my,
You go first. Yeah.
I'm going to go back to B10 as well. Mr. Giuliana, is that the numbers that we're looking at? Would you say that they're etched in granite? And that's as far as we're going to have to go with regard to the expenditures of money for technology initiative programs, or is this something that we could see again on a quarterly basis? I know that if there is a need for technology here in the district, then Dr. Valesky tries to do whatever he can to get improvements as often as possible, and each time it costs money. So I'm looking at this, and is this a one-shot deal and we're done?
Not necessarily.
No.
This is not money that is, first let me emphasize, this is not money coming out of the East Brunswick Public School District budget. We receive funds from the state that belongs to the non-public schools. So the non-public schools each get an allocation. It's a per pupil allocation. So just as an example, one of the schools here is St. Bart's with $7,320 in expenditures. They can spend up to whatever that allocation is. It's possible that is what their allocation is. So they would not necessarily come back with any additional purchases. It's also possible that some of the schools may not utilize the entirety of their allocation initially and then come back through and process additional orders, which would then have to go through the approval process.
It seems like it's a rather small list because I'm not seeing any of the, let's say, private high schools that many of our students could be going to, so that expenditure is not there.
Well, and that's because the private high schools are not located in East Brunswick.
Get it.
This represents the non-public schools within the township of East Brunswick boundaries. And those are the only non-public schools that we would report on.
Got it. And are we including, Dr. Cullen, operational items as well?
Yes.
And when we combine everything? Therefore, C1, Mr. Giuliano, once again, it's a couple of questions. I see rod grants in that second paragraph, but then when I turn the page and I see the chart, it says there are no
rod grants.
I was under the assumption that rod grants did not exist anymore.
They've not been renewed in terms of funding.
Okay.
So I don't want to say that they don't exist. They may come back, but right now there's no funding for them.
And then when we look at the projects ranging from the maintenance building, administrative building, the high school, Hammersholt and Memorial, the high school is limited to the cafeteria. Is there any reason why the gymnasium would not be part of?
That had been previously submitted.
Okay, so everything is good with the gymnasium?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Dr. Cohen.
Thank you. Mrs. Shaw.
In the operational items, there's a couple of items that are awarding contracts for professional services, and I wondered whether we had issued requests for proposals on any of those, or how the district goes about researching the costs that are involved in them, and also how we go about researching who in fact would be the best vendor for those types of contracts.
Is there one in particular? There are two consultants.
C5 and C3, I believe it was.
And, well, I was looking at C4, the installation, and B4 is a dance instructor located in Union for $20,000. So there's a few of them in there.
So, so if I can respond to the C items to begin with.
Okay.
This, in C5, environmental design, this is annually solicited. They are our environmental consultants, and the rates under which they do work are approved by the board under a blanket contract.
So that is done at the, like, annually, we
Yes.
vote on those types of
Yes.
things? Okay.
In this particular case, because of the size of the project, we always bring these types of things back to the board. As you can see in this case, this remediation is estimated at this point to be about $200,000. So it's sizable. It's important that we keep the board informed of these items, and so that's why you're seeing this. But your original question is, yes, we annually solicit requests for pricing from various environmental entities. And environmental design has been working with us for a number of years, so they have a high degree of familiarity with the school district. In C3...
And on the C5, and the $200,000 only comes into play if they actually have to dig up the tanks and take them out versus if it's been closed properly we wouldn't incur that expense?
Correct,
Right.
correct. And these are, we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
That's the issue here.
Okay.
So hopefully remediation was properly done 20 years ago, or whatever the time frame was. And we won't have to incur maybe half the cost, but we don't know at this point.
Okay.
Okay. On C3, which is for SOR testing laboratories, this company was recommended by our, I believe it was our architectural professionals, because this is a hot topic. The township code officials have requested and required that we have a testing laboratory essentially certify the structural steel that's being installed for the two projects, the one at Chittick and the one at Irwin. There's structural steel that is being installed to be able to sustain the rooftop units that will service the buildings, and they want an independent laboratory to be able to report on the efficacy of the steel. So on this, we utilized because we have no experience with testing laboratories, we turned to our architectural professionals for their recommendations to us as to who could meet the timelines necessary and be able to provide us costs that were reasonable. I think there may have been two that were looked at, but this company was the one that responded fully to our inquiry.
Along the same lines, if some, let's say our environmental consultant that had been approved by the board at their annual reorg meeting, if they were not able to meet our timelines, do we have a backup? Or do we then at that point have to issue a new request for proposals?
No, we'd really need to revisit the entire relationship that exists with the environmental company, because they really need to be intimately aware of the circumstances in the district. It's not just a matter of, well, we want them to deal with an asbestos abatement issue in one school for the removal of a non-friable tile. They really need to have a comprehensive understanding of what exists throughout all of our buildings. And so the short answer to what you asked is that it's difficult to have the backups, because it's more than just being the consultant for a particular job. It's having that knowledge base as well.
Yeah,
Would you have needed a request for proposal for $11,000 anyway?
No.
No.
You just need a competitive quote if it's a biddable item. These are professional services, so you technically, it's recommended best practices to do it, and that's why you guys do the RFPs each year, RFQs, to get it. But if it's a biddable item, toilet paper, and it's under the bid threshold, and Bernie's a qualified purchasing agent, so he has a higher bid threshold, you then just have to get two competitive quotes so that you're getting the best price. And that's why if you see a lot of times in your competitive quotes, you guys use Middlesex Regional Services that goes out with huge buying power.
Mrs. Howard?
Yeah, talking about that HVAC at Irwin, is that going on the roof over that cinder block extension?
At Irwin, no. That block extension that you see on the side is where the chillers will be housed. And that block wall, that masonry wall, is built to contain the noise that comes off of a chiller. Because we have classrooms maybe about 30 feet, 40 feet away, so we want to make sure that that's specifically to help deaden the noise that would come off of them.
Yeah, I saw it today, and I'm sure other people driving a racetrack go, what is that?
You would see a similar situation, right off the top I'm thinking at Central, where the chillers are contained off the side of the building.
Yeah, Dr. Gillespie explained to me that, about the air, but I didn't realize about the chillers.
So, I'm sorry, for C4, just a question on that. This insulation is sound insulation? Is that what that is?
C4?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, C4 is...
Is that the one you were just talking about, Holly? When you were asking about insulation?
No, but that,
No, Holly was referring to construction work that I think you observed over at Irwin.
Yeah, well, C4 made me bring it up because you were talking about Irwin and the HVAC.
Mr. Giuliano, would you mind just walking the board through the conversation you and I had earlier this evening about just how the accounting structured so they understand how the money flows in your document here?
Sure. On C4?
Yes.
Okay. So on C4, this is a change order reducing an allowance that was included in the Irwin HVAC project. The reason for the reduction is that the contractor did not have the wherewithal in which to be able to address the extent of asbestos remediation that needs to be done in order for that contractor to complete its work. So in conjunction with our environmental consultant, and almost every project that we have been doing this summer, our environmental consultant has been part of that in one way or another because of the conditions that exist, whether it's friable asbestos, non-friable asbestos, floor tile, a variety of issues. So in this case, in order to get the asbestos remediation done, and the remediation deals with piping. In most cases, it's around elbows and valves. And so in order for the contractor to do that work, their work, that asbestos needs to be removed where it's in their line of work. So we've engaged, we are engaging another contractor to do the asbestos remediation. This is a contractor that has done a lot of work for us in the past, rather than doing it through this contractor's contract. But we're taking the money out of his allowance to be able to pay for that work. So it's a net zero. It's not costing us an additional amount somewhere else. We had an allowance for it. We're reallocating that money to the company that will actually be doing the work.
Okay, and
that makes sense?
Clarifies it. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
It just bothers me that they bid on a contract knowing that they're in buildings where there's a good possibility that there's going to be asbestos and had no capacity to handle that. Would it have changed who we would have given the bid to?
No, it wouldn't have, but I think one of the things that is very difficult, not I think, I can tell you with certainty, one of the things that's very difficult to be able to project, and that is what are the unknown conditions. So these types of conditions...
But you're dealing with old buildings, and it's well known that there's a lot of those buildings that had asbestos, so I would think if you're bidding, there's a good possibility you may have to deal with that.
You may,
and they should be capable of handling that.
But you may anticipate, and certainly that's something that was included in the information provided to the contractors, but the reality is that no two old buildings are built the same, nor do they have the same degree of asbestos-containing materials. And so it's a real unknown until all of the ceilings are removed and you get up there and
I understand,
actually see it.
but you're saying that you told them from the outset that there's a possibility that there could be asbestos, and they bid on the contract,
But not the
and now,
quantities.
wow, they found it, and now they can't.
But not the quantities. And what we're saying is that the quantities were much greater than what they anticipated having to be removed. Because not seeing what the paths were that would have to be crossed to install all the new piping, without having that clearly visible, it's impossible
No,
to
that part I
guess.
don't have an issue with. But, and are we certain that the $60,000 that you're taking back from them is going to cover the cost of asbestos removal at this point, or we really don't even know that?
No, for this remediation, we've received pricing that this is the amount.
Okay.
And I know I was finished, but Mrs. Shaw, you fired up Mr. McAvoy's cylinders And then when we start using...
That's getting a little...
And then when we start using some buzzwords from Mr. Juliana, like the unknown conditions, Dr. Valesky, could there be some unknown... I'll start off with, can there be some unknown conditions regarding these two 10,000-gallon underground storage tanks that were decommissioned in the 1990s? Here it is quite a few years later. Could there be a problem with that? And I guess the second part of the question is, I know through Buildings and Grounds where these tanks are located, but do you foresee a problem with construction or destruction of these tanks prior to school beginning? So it's a mouthful there. But,
Mr. McAvoy, I'll address, let's see, we'll start from the beginning. Do I foresee that there could be some issues? Yes, there potentially could be some unforeseen conditions. Until they completely investigate and inspect the tanks, we don't know if they were buried in place, or if the remediation was proper, or if there's any underground leakage resulting from those tanks, maybe through corrosion or improper burial.
But I don't mean to interrupt you, but could this be cleaned up before school starts?
I don't think it's going to be a before school issue.
Okay.
I think it's going to be ongoing. I think that the testing, as long as we have some testing in place, we'll be given some flexibility for the actual remediation. So as long as we're taking proactive measures to address the issue, I think we protect the district. But the project will be dependent upon if there's any contamination of surrounding soil. That could be the potential problem. If we have to remove the tanks, and how much surrounding soil, and then what kind of issues do we have because of the close proximity to the foundation of the high school.
So a lot of unknown conditions
Correct.
at this point. Okay.
We won't know until the laboratory testing is done. So the first piece of this is really to open up the area and take samples, examine the tank, take soil samples to determine if there's any kind of contamination. If there isn't, then I think the DEP will simply say, okay, everything was done properly and you can close it up. If there's an indication of anything other than that, then we're talking about the next steps, which could involve soil removal. We don't know. Again, there's no way to know what that would be.
To follow up on Kevin's point, at that time when we know the soil we need to remove, we'll also be able to judge the useful life of that tank, won't we?
The tank's
not in use.
It's an abandoned tank.
Right.
Yeah.
So we were using the tank at all.
It's been out of service for 20-plus years.
These are fuel oil tanks.
And we never addressed the idea of removing it or anything like that.
Well, they wouldn't have been. The typical manner in which to address tanks was to abandon in place, but they needed to be emptied and they needed to be filled. So those are things we don't know, because for whatever reasons, the DEP may have lost the paperwork. I mean, there are a whole variety of reasons for this. Bottom line is that on the DEP's end, they show that this file was not closed, and that's what raised the issue.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question on B4. This is the Carolyn Dorfman Dance Company in Union. So a lot of these kind of supplemental programs are, a couple thousand, few hundred. This one's 20,000 for less than 2-month period. And, it goes back to that question of, how was this dance company selected? Is it bid out, or is this, could we use someone from East Brunswick as opposed to someone from Union?
This particular company, I know, has been working with our curriculum department and the schools in the visual and performing arts area for many, many years. So there's a long-standing familiarity and relationship that exists in terms of knowing what we get out of this company. As far as this being something that has been out to bid, no, it has not. This comes with the recommendation of the curricular supervisors in terms of what will work best for their program.
It seems like a lot for a 2-month period, but I don't know, what exactly they're getting for that.
At least it's for all fifth graders.
All fifth graders.
Don't they put on a performance? At the
I believe that they do.
Yes, it's all fifth graders.
But they also do a performance
Mhm.
at the PAC as
At the
well.
PAC, don't they?
Yep.
For the community?
I believe,
Or is
no,
it for the,
It's for all the kids.
No.
for all the kids?
with the kids,
With the
yes.
kids?
But it's not where, I don't believe that the company itself does a public performance.
Okay.
They work with the kids, and the kids put on a performance. I think that's how that works.
So every fifth grade student goes through this program?
Yes, I believe so.
They have to meet the standard. and
Part of the
all
core
that.
curriculum content standards.
Yeah.
Mr. Giuliano, can we take a look at how long this has actually been a recurring
Absolutely.
recommendation, and then possibly report back to the board about how many times we've renewed with a certain company, and whether or not we've done any other quality control checking to see if there are any other providers out there that might provide similar services that would still meet the needs of our curriculum.
We can definitely do that.
Good.
Thank you.
We're good? I think we need a roll call then.
I think so, too. Okay.
Yes.
Mrs. Becker?
Yes.
Mrs. Chu?
Yes.
Mrs. Howard?
Yes.
Mrs. Lax?
Yes.
Mr. McAvoy?
Yes.
Mr. Philipchak?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes?
Mr. Simmons?
Yes.
And Dr. Cohen?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.